Welcome back to the Standard Podcast, and I'm Mark Blunden. Please do make sure to give us a follow and a rating. You join us for the Standard Podcast's Future of Artificial Intelligence special, and we're joined from the AI Action Summit in Paris by Andrew Strait, Associate Director at the Ada Lovelace Institute and former ethics and policy researcher at Google's DeepMind AI project, and we'll discuss the technology's latest developments and potential concerns over the replacement of human workers and AI's impact on our cognitive abilities. What is new in Paris? Is there anything totally unseen before that's being revealed and discussed this week?
I think what we've seen in Paris this week that is new is a fork in the road in which we're seeing countries have to decide between two visions of the future of this fast-paced and fast-developing technology. The summit is one where we see a path being marked out, particularly by the United States, which is really framed around the future of the technology, about all around national domination. It's a framing that talks about winners and losers in AI. It's a framing that talks about putting corporate interests ahead of the public interests. And it's a framing that talks about a race to a finish line that isn't really clear where that finish line is. Now, the other path that we're seeing is the one the French governments and many European nations and other global nations are putting forth. And that's this path that's talking about nations working together to build a world where AI works for people and society. At the summit, we've seen the announcement today of a $400 million new foundation, which will be aimed at trying to provide infrastructure, research for public interest technologies, and will help build this shared constructive future of how AI can be beneficial for everyone. But this is something that, again, is not the first time we've been in this type of scenario with emerging technologies. This happened with the internet, where we had a moment where it could have gone down the path of being a military technology. Instead, it was one that was much more international focused. I think today and this whole week in France, we've seen a very similar moment with AI.
And what about the AI models, the usable software that's emerging for business use?
There's a really challenging moment that I think we're seeing in AI when it comes to the new paradigm of models, which many of your listeners may have heard. These are sort of large models that are capable of a general range of tasks. That's in comparison to older types of AI systems that are much more narrowly focused. You train a model to just detect images on a cancer screening, or just be able to give you a prediction for what the weather might be. Now we're seeing models that are capable of a much wider set of general tasks being deployed. What we are seeing as well, though, is that this pace of development and advancement of the science of AI technologies is vastly outpacing the rate of adoption of these technologies in sectors of the economy. And a lot of that comes down to consumer confidence. Many businesses we speak with are very concerned that the technology doesn't work, that it's not reliable, that they don't have assurance that it is safe. And I think that creates a challenge for governments who are trying to understand where are these potential economic benefits of this technology and what types of infrastructure, regulation, governance will be needed in order to ensure those.
In terms of the themes, the mood and the outlook in Paris, how would you describe this in terms of the difference with what we saw 2 years ago at Bletchley Park? This year we have this theme of action. In Bletchley Park it was safety. What is the evolution here?
Bletchley was focused a lot on this question of safety, particularly this question of a technology that's advancing at such fast pace by a select number of large U.S. tech companies, but without a real sense of the kinds of governance practices, safety procedures in place to ensure that it won't cause mass harm or mass labor displacement or a range of other issues. And a lot about Bletchley was trying to do a couple things. One was trying to set industry practices to try to answer some of these questions about safety and move a bit more of a cautious pace. The second was a start of an international attempt at creating research programs aimed at trying to study the impacts of these advancing technologies. So one of the announcements at the French Summit this year is an international AI safety report. This is a kind of like a multi-expert international effort to look across all the evidence of where AI is having harmful or positive impacts and essentially put up a very rigorously researched report. That all came about because of Bletchley. I think that one of the big differences, though, we're seeing at this summit is the focus is much more on accelerating adoption. Safety is not a word in the summit's declaration. It's not been a word I've heard at all, really, in many of the discussions with state leaders. Most of the focus has been on trying to get as much AI in the public and private sector as possible. It's a very stark difference, I think, from a year ago, where we're much more concerned about a cautious approach.
Interesting research from the Institute of Public Policy Research last week, which suggested that, in quotes, AI could replace up to 70% of computer-based jobs. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really good piece of research. I think it is important to acknowledge a few things. One is that the entire world that we've created, and all of the work, the jobs, the roles that we inhabit in that world is a human-based world. And it is a truism of technology in the past that you cannot just drop a technology into a human-based world to just simply replace a human. So as we talk about some of these tasks that could be replaced by AI, that's very distinct and different from saying it will be or could easily be replaced by AI. Much of the burdens or much of the sort of friction that stops that from happening often is about the messiness of the work environments that we have and the way in which they're designed around that kind of messy, chaotic human behavior. I think the other issue is this question of a technology that might be capable of a task, like performing a particular back-end administrative task like entry of data, but can it do it reliably, and can it do it every single time, and can it do it in a way that it is trusted amongst its human operators to do? That is another issue that we see with this technology. By its nature, this new paradigm of AI, this general purpose technology, it is very hard to control and very hard to ensure that the same task is done the same way with the same output every time. So that creates, again, some inherent questions about how much of a productivity boon, how much of a job displacement factor will this technology actually have? The most important question there is we need to study that. We need to actually monitor, assess, move slowly, pilot the technology, and build governance that ensures companies and businesses are doing the same.
Let's go to a quick break. Coming up in part 2, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and the human mind. Welcome back. Now back to Paris and Andrew Strait, Associate Director at the Ada Lovelace Institute. Have there been any presentations around humanity managing to future-proof itself somehow?
This is something that has not had much focus at the summit. The summit has not really focused that much on articulating a very clear vision of what the appropriate and public interest use cases of this technology are. We talk about AI as this kind of catch-all term, but really what we want to know, I think, as members of the public, is how will this achieve the basic things that I need in my life? How is it going to improve the education of my children? How is it going to improve my healthcare? How can it help my job? How can it help my employment? How can it help even my sort of security or my sense of safety? Those use cases of the technology are often going to be very specific, very focused, and probably not that extreme. They'll probably be much more humble uses of the technology. That has not been the sort of topic of discussion at the summit. Oftentimes we've heard it talked about in quite vague ways. It's sort of, it will be potentially beneficial for humanity. It will be wonderful and useful. But I think, as this report correctly identifies, you can't really develop a public beneficial technology unless you know how you're benefiting the public, unless you're applying it to a very specific use case where it is very achievable and where the public are interested in using it.
Last year, it was very much all about OpenAI, ChatGPT. 2025 is shaping up to be big for China's DeepSeek. How is the picture in Britain? What's currently ready to break in terms of big tech, and what more do you think we need to do to keep up?
I think the United Kingdom is in an incredible position on several aspects of AI where they can compete. One is talent. We have an incredible higher education system in this country that attracts the world's top minds to come to this country to learn and to build technology. We also have an incredible, for such a small relative country to the United States, a lot of an incredible startup industry of really brilliant innovators who are trying to build the most important thing that I think when we talk about AI, which is products, these tools that we actually use in our day-to-day lives. Where we can't compete is with the amount of energy, chip infrastructure, and large technology capital that the US and China will always outcompete the UK on. And so as government is starting to think through its plans and its strategy around technology and AI, one question I have to ask is, where are we best able to compete? I think one of the most important things we need to remind ourselves is that ChatGPT is a product. It's something that is widely available for hundreds of millions of people to use from just a simple computer connection. It is built using advanced AI models that OpenAI trained, but those types of advanced models are now easily accessible for anyone, including you and I. We can go download that type of performing model today. What is really hard is to create a product, an actual application that we can integrate and use for particular purposes. And that, I think, is where the UK has an incredible moment to innovate and to grow. But that will take a lot of assurance, a lot of governance, a lot of practices that, as they would with aviation safety or car safety or food safety, make consumers and members of the public feel like the technology is trustworthy, working in their interests, and is safe.
What could you share with us in terms of what is currently being developed in those big research labs and potentially even for military use?
Two things that I think we'll see in the next year that are very important to consider as what's coming next. One is what we are calling agentic systems, which are systems that are capable of taking complex real-world actions. So think of Siri, your sort of Apple Siri on steroids. Siri could do a Google search for you. It might even be able to book a meeting for you. Now, all of the major technology companies are trying to build assistants that are capable of taking much more complex actions, like manipulating your internet browser to go to Expedia.com and book you a flight. The more complex that these actions are, the more difficult it is to control and to ensure that they are not working. But one of the challenging things is that if you can imagine a world of agents, billions of them interacting with each other, interacting with other humans, interacting with businesses in the open web, it creates an enormous challenge around governance and regulation, but also just around the internet's infrastructure. So I think that will be an interesting development we'll see in the next year. The second is certainly around military technologies. We are seeing a lot of increasing partnerships between major technology companies and U.S. military and Western militaries to develop advanced intelligence, surveillance, and targeting systems using this current generation of AI technologies. It likely means, and particularly this is coming out of the US, the way they talk about AI, that we will see more investments and more developments in advanced battlefield technologies coming into the market in the next year ahead.
Last week, we reported on the potential for quantum computing and the hopes that this could even boost national economic output. What do we know about the future intersection of artificial intelligence with this ultra-powerful quantum computing that we're hearing more and more about?
Quantum computing is essentially, to sum up what its impact would be very significantly, it would massively increase the computing power of existing systems by orders of magnitude that we're talking sort of hundreds, not thousands. And the immediate impacts of that would be you'd have much, much, much more powerful computing systems capable of taking actions much more faster. And the implications of that would be all of our encryption, all of our sort of modes of ensuring data is secure might be at risk. There's a number of other issues that arise. I think my understanding of the technology so far is that we're still talking about something that's 10, 15, maybe even 20 years away from showing enough progress where we'd see it in or affecting our day-to-day lives. But as we've seen with AI, if you talked to me 10 years ago, I would have said the same thing about AI technologies. Uplifts and sort of mass breakthroughs can occur very quickly. It's very good that the UK is leading on this. But will we see this happen in the next year? I think it's very unlikely.
There is the wider question about how outsourcing these even small tasks could impact the human brain and even, without sounding too dramatic, our abilities with critical thinking and those kinds of small tasks. What are your thoughts on this?
If you can remember back to an era before Google Maps, before you used Google Maps to sort of find your way around, you might remember a time where you might have thought your natural sense of direction was significantly better than it might be now. And this is an effect called de-skilling. And there's quite a lot of studies that show that when we have a technology that we start to rely on for basic tasks like finding our way around a city or even around sort of a train station or an environment, it can actually reduce our natural ability to identify this. There's a lot of research coming out of major labs, even from Microsoft. There's a paper that shows that the same de-skilling effect can occur when using and relying on AI systems for certain kinds of cognitive knowledge tasks. That includes things like how to research papers, how to search for certain kinds of difficult to find information, even writing tasks, sort of what makes a good style of writing. So as we start to see this technology deployed in much more everyday settings, being used to write blog posts, being used to, in the case of the UK government, there's a tool called Lex, which is being used to generate ideas for law. We might see some cases where this technology might have the unintended effects of de-skilling those civil servants or those writers from those types of tasks. I'm not saying it will, but I'm certainly saying that we've seen quite a lot of evidence that this could take place. And that's all the more reason why it's important to do these kinds of continuous monitoring, assessments, and evaluations of the effects of the system. If we don't study the systemic impacts over long periods of time, we might find ourselves in a world where, well, none of us may know how to write. None of us know how to write laws. None of us may know other simple tasks as we might once have done when we knew how to navigate a city.
And that's The Standard. For the latest news, head over to standard.co.uk. This podcast is back tomorrow at 4 p.m.